Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile build guide video. In this one, I'm going to talk about something I've always loved, and that's Spectres in Path of Exile. But this is for Path of Exile 1, and it is the build guide update for 326. And I just wanted to make basically a big or a little shout out to the written guide, which will be updated by the time this video is posted, actually. Linked in the descriptions below, covering all the details for the actual build. We are, with 326, getting Settlers of Caligur as a core mechanic, which means we get access to a thing called Verisium Veins. For those of you who are new to Path of Exile 1 coming from PoE 2, I have no idea what the hell I just said. What it means is that we have access to certain types of monsters that normally doesn't exist in the game. One of the best Spectres in the game that we've seen for a very long time is called Forged Frostbearers, and they work fantastically on low budget and medium budget and even high budget if you so choose to play them. However, the way I approach the pure Spectre build is that I like better clear speed with similar defenses and similar single targets, but better clear through a Spectre called Wretched Defilers, which is something I use for the high budget. Either way, I'm going to be showing you the PoE and talk a little bit about the build. Playstyle is exactly the same. Everything is covered in the build guide, and let's crack into it. So this is the written build guide you'll find on PoE Vault, Icy Veins, where we have the pure Spectre Summoner build. This build is going to see some updates leading into 326 to get some improvements on the actual guide, but you'll have some pages here. You can check the details for PoE's passes, gear and jewels and flasks, ascendancies, animate Guardian Spectres in detail, gear progression of how to actually upgrade the build between the budgets, and a Spectre changelog if you so choose to do so, or the front page for those of you who are veterans out there that might just want to see the TLDR rundown of the build and then pick out the PoE. You'll have that on the first page. A little bit of information here, rundown, pros and cons, play style, damage scaling, PoEs and everything. However, you cannot level with Spectres if you don't have these necessary gear for it. So, as a result, here's the PoE. We do have a link to the description down below, a link to a newly posted Necromancer Minion leveling guide, both a PoE as well as a video, as well as a written guide in detail for those of you coming over from Path of Exile 2, might be new players, and you guys might want to have some extra information to help you out in navigating through the jungle that is Path of Exile 1. Anyways, enough of that. Let's crack into the PoE. It's very straightforward. This is the low budget version, doing about 3 million DPS. We are going to be using the Forged Frostbearer Spectres. So my first take here is that I would not recommend playing with this unless you have 3 Spectres or more and you have to have the correct Spectre, which means you'll probably play with Absolution through the campaign, through early stage mapping, until you have the necessary level of stuff that you need to make this happen. This will obviously be covered in the guides. But I just want to point that out. So what we're doing with the skill tree, we are going to use an Unending Hunger for this. This is a luxury upgrade. Do not focus on buying this first. Sometimes it's super expensive in some leagues, it's just a couple of chaos. This is a luxury upgrade, so don't waste currency on this unless it's cheap, I guess. Just want to point that out because some people focuses on this, and that's not the right play. Either way, this is basically the PoE for it, and what we're doing here is we're having the leech mechanic, we have extra resistances, we get affected by the offering we're using, and we get the extra physical damage mitigation as well as some extra damage from mindless aggression. That's the ascendancy parts. Pantheon wise, we're using Brine King for the freeze immunity, Soul of Aberrath for the less duration of ignites, and we're going to use a Tempest Shield aura to get rid of shock immunity or get shock immunity. Outside of that, the build is currently packing this simple generic skill tree, no clusters, nothing fancy. It's very straightforward. Skill wise, we are going to be using the Forged Frostbearers. And hold up, before you say anything, when it comes to the Spectre count and levels and everything, this is all simulated to be accurate in the actual PoE so that it is representative of what's actually going to be seen and shown. So I just want to point that out. The projectile count being 16, like everything here has a purpose for it, so don't be confused. PoEing minion builds can be very, very tricky or scary sometimes, but we have a 16 count. This is actually their projectile with greater volley, which is not supposed to be greater multiple projectiles. It has to be greater volley. It allows these minions to shoot projectiles in a barrage line in front of them, and then when they collide and explode, those projectiles will then shotgun and collateral damage each projectile on the same target, which is then referred to as shotgunning. That's why this is set to 16 to get a reasonable and actually accurate display of the DPS output by these minions. We're running that with Spell Echo, Greater Volley, Minion Damage, Cold Penetration, and Hypothermia, and we'll have the same set of single targets. We'll have a pair of 4-link with your Chaos Golem as well as Raise Zombie. This is to get yourself some extra Chaos Rest with the 326 patch. Feeding Frenzy buff and some extra zombies just to trigger that for us. We'll have a trigger weapon in which we have Desecrate and Bone Offering, giving our minions and ourselves block chance. We'll run an Animate Guardian with Minion Life, and the Animate Guardian can be checked if you drop the down menu here. You can hover over this, see the Sandus' cassock chest. We have AG with like Corrupted Element, the weakness, with Windscreen Boots to make him able to curse an additional curse on top of what you're doing. Layer Cast Dying Breath. Just do the click down menu and you can actually check these items out quite effectively yourself in the PoE. They'll be in the written guide in details as well. Outside of that, we have a mobility, fast attack, shield charge. We have Convocation, Frostblink. We run an Enduring Cry for the endurance charge in the low budget, Frostbite Curse, and then we have Flesh and Stone. There's a little 3 or 4 dots there to talk about how the Petrified Blood is dealt with in the custom config to get the accurate DPS or defense layers. We're running Petrified Blood, which is a bit of a tricky thing to get used to. What it does is that it prevents you from getting life recovery above 50% of your life, but it does allow you to have some other benefits from it. When you're taking damage, percent of that damage that you're taking is then taken as damage over time effect instead. But since you're life regenerating so much, that is not going to be a problem. So you're basically taking away a chunk of the instantaneous damage and taking that as a dot effect on you instead, which we're then mitigating and countering. So it's a very, very comfortable way of providing defensive layers. Then we have a Generosity Wrath setup, which is basically, Zealotry, Generosity Zealotry, in which we're in a position where the Zealotry does not apply to us. We don't need it, but it applies a stronger version to our minions. So that's basically the setup for this build. We're going to be making some minor tune-ups on the PoE to make it look good, make sure everything is accurate before it's being posted, obviously. And in the gear-wise, we have a wand, or in this case, since you only have +1, when I say +1 on a weapon, that means I'm referring to a +1 level of spell skills or +1 level of all minion skills. So this could be another type of weapon if it's only a + level spell skills. But to get the minion damage, you'll need to do this on a calling, convening, or convoking wand. With a benchcraft trigger spells, this is where the triggering from the Desecrate and Offering is kicking in. We'll run a shield with life and any rest attributes, but plus level of minion skills in here. We'll run a +2 level of minion skills, preferably with life, but you want to benchcraft plus raise zombie skeletons in here if you have the opportunity to do so. It's not super important, but it does help you get that extra zombie out of it. So if you find one that has full prefixes, just skip the benchcraft, you'll be fine. The chest piece, just a standard, classic, low-budget, corrupted 6-link. If you can get life mod on it, great. If not, then you'll pick up a life mastery, which gives you 15% more life. If there's no life modifiers on your chest, you just buy these from the trade. It should be about 20C, depending on the how many hours in the league you're buying it. Gauntlets, so the gloves, just attribute life resistances, that's it. Boots, we are using Bones of Ullr in the low budget to help you get that extra level for raised specters and zombies. This is to further get to the breaking point where you're getting more specters, because at level 25 Spectre gem you actually get an additional Spectre. So you can have 4 Spectres in total when you have Death Attunement Spectre on your tree or oiled, and that's basically the play. In our case, we're actually oiling Deflection for better block chance and Endurance Charge when you block, outside of the Enduring Cry. So that's the purpose behind the Bones of Ullr. Obviously, in 326, we'll have access to things like the Mercenaries, which means that we can put gear that we want for aura-wise on him rather than ourselves, because the build right now is using a Purkle's Toe, and this is to get nearby allies. Damage with hits is lucky. You could place this on one of your Mercenaries instead and run any other type of amulet, like a replica Dragon Fang, a rare amulet with plus level of spell skills, life resistances, attributes, whatever you feel like doing. But that's another option you can do for 326. We'll have some bone rings with increased attack and cast speed for your minions and life. That's basically kind of important. And reducing the cost of his spells is very, very nice to have. It's not mandatory, but it does help. Darkness of Throne, very low roll for the low budget, in which we have different optional jewels. The option A is GHAZZY with a life and a cold damage for them, and the option B, which does not go in the belt, would be a life and minion damage cobalt jewels. These are usually very cheap. Unending Hunger, like I mentioned earlier, is obviously a luxury update, and you're gonna want one jewel that has preferably life and a damage mod, but you want to have taunt most importantly. The blind is okay, but the taunt one actually does quite a lot for you, so you want to have one of these preferably actually shoved into your belt, so do keep that in mind. But that is the generic rundown of the gear, very straightforward and simple to grasp. However, what I wanted to show you is the medium body version for Spectres. In the medium body Spectre, we're making quite a lot of changes. We're actually going in for a full spell suppression approach to maintain high defenses. PoB DPS is now 9.5. We are using the new item Bitterbind Point from, it's not updated, so there's a red mod I've added myself here to simulate what's going to happen in 3.26 when the patch comes in, because Path of Building isn't updated. And we're going to be choosing the extra projectile veil here, not the extra Spectre, because for the Forged Frostbearers, you actually benefit more damage output when running multiple projectiles. When you go to the high budget version, that's when you want to have an extra Spectre instead, because we're changing the type of Spectre we're using. Medium budget, we're using a +2/1, that's +1 level of spell skills and the minion skills. Trigger, of course, the Bitterbind Point, as I mentioned. We are at this point running Wraith Lord Helmet, which means you lose 4 sockets from your gear because the helmet can only have Ghastly Eye Jewels, or should only have Ghastly Eye Jewels in it instead. And for each one socketed, you'll get an additional Spectre. So in this case, we'll have 9 Spectres. And these jewels are just life and damage. If you can get attribute resistances, that's great. We'll have to have a chest piece from a Delve Encounters that gets you +1 number of maximum Spectres. We'll run generic boots with spell suppression and gloves with spell suppression. We'll have a Jinx Juju for extra defensive layer. We're oiling the Death Attunement node I mentioned earlier. I will need an Unset Ring, which I have only life and dexterity in the PoB right now. We have a Bone Ring with damage, APS, life and attributes is needed. Higher roll, Darkness Enthroned. Same thing with the jewels here, life and damage. We'll run an Enduring Composure for the endurance chart is in one of the cluster slots in the top right corner. And then we have a Green Nightmare jewel, which I'll talk about. But yet again, the Unending Hunger is a luxury upgrade. And I want to talk about the Green Nightmare. So this is a Green Nightmare placed in the Cyan Wheel tree at the very bottom, or in the middle of the tree, but the bottom of the nodes that we're doing. This one makes it so that passive that grants cold resistance or elemental resistances in radius also grants spell suppression at 70% of its value. Down here, you have a bit of cold rest right there, and you have elemental resistance right here, and we have access to spell suppression here on the right-hand side, as well as Mage Bane, which makes it so that dexterity does not provide any inherent bonus to evasion rating, which we don't really care too much about, but we do care about spell suppression, and we are a little bit overcapped with this, so that's quite important to make sure you get 100% spell suppression to make sure you don't die to those type of damage hits. But that is why we're doing this little setup for this build, and everything else is quite generic and straightforward. Running Forged Frostbearers, it's trying to keep the budget down as best as possible. Now this build will get you through everything in the end game except for tier 17s. I wouldn't recommend doing it. I know it can handle some of them if you're careful with the mods you're rolling, but I wouldn't recommend farming it. It's not something you'll do uber bosses with. It's a medium budget minion build. However, if you go into a high budget version of this, things change quite drastically. Now, as you can see, my DPS went down in PoB. This is because Path of Building cannot properly calculate the Wretched Defiler Spectres. But I want to talk about that in just a moment. In the medium budget first, to finalize this, we are using a couple of different setups. First off, we're using the 9 Spectres that we have access to, fully on the Forged Frostbearers, and we're running Determination, Tempest Shield, Generosity Zealotry, Frostbite Curse, and all this jazz. However, we have a 4-link setup, which is for a transfigured version of the Race Spectre gem, which is Spectres of Transience. These are temporarily summoned Spectres, which will run with Guardian's Blessing, Vol Haste, or regular haste actually, with Feeding Frenzy. So this is how we trigger the Feeding Frenzy and have extra damage output. These are duration-based Spectres. They share the cap of your other Spectres, but they have on baseline a higher available summoning pool, which is 7 in this case, instead of the 5 that I have on the regular one, plus the 4 from my helmets, which means that when you run 9 Spectres, you can have let me double check some. 3, so I can actually have up to quite a few more. So what then happens is that you want to summon 1 or 2 Ray Spectre Transients from your Desecrate pool. So you cast Desecrate, you summon a Transient Spectre just to get that haste running and the Feeding Frenzy. But don't summon too many, because if you summon too many, they're going to start replacing your Forged Frostbearer. So be a little careful with that. We only need 1 or 2, because they're just there for the haste and Feeding Frenzy. But that's how we approach it in the medium budget. I'm very happy with this. I had a lot of fun playing this last league as well. On the other hand, in the high budget version, things changed quite drastically. You might be reminded that I did a Doriani setup on the Mage Skelly build for high budget. We are doing that in the high budget PoE for Spectres as well. This is the build I was farming tier 17 juiced up maps with. It's, well, pretty close to unkillable. It's definitely not immortal, but it was extremely tanky. It was clearing 1 or 1.5 screen away from me. It was absolutely crazy. It was very fun to play. The build packs something around north of 100 million DPS, depending on your gear. But in the end, it's running Doriani's prototype. Replica Dragon Fang, and we're running the Bittermine point, but this time with extra Spectre. Wraith Lord in this specific one, again, +2 wand, and when running a ring, that gives us, with a reflective mist crafted ring with negative lightning resistance. This is then copied with a Calandra's Touch. You have 2 of those to get your lightning rest down to -200. Then we're running a very cool setup, which I'll explain. First off, I'm helping my Chaos Rest with a Light of Meaning down here in the corner, unless your gear is crazy enough to handle that without it. Then I'm running a Glorious Vanity with Automation Studies in 2 locations to get Divine Flesh. So what Doriani's prototype is doing is very important to point out for this specific high budget, which is probably the only thing I'll spend time on here. Otherwise, we'll just show you guys the build guide and the PoEs down below. But this is more for the veteran players out there. But Doriani's prototype, what it does is that it makes it so that when you take damage from lightning hits, it's mitigated by your armor. However, unlike PoE 2, in PoE 1, there are quite a few sources of lightning damage over time effects, which Doriani's prototype does not help with, which means you will die immediately. And a lot of people solve this by shitty solutions like Lethe Shade, which is this one, to reduce the 1.5 second for you to die now becomes like 2 seconds to die instead. It's just, no, like 2.25 seconds to die. Like, no, I just don't want to die at all. So what we do is we run a Glorious Vanity of Sibakwa to get Divine Flesh. What this does is that it ups your max Chaos Rest from 75 to 80 and makes it so that all damage you take bypasses energy shields. We don't care about energy shield. But 50% of every source of elemental damage that you take is now taken by your Chaos Resistance instead. This goes for Fire, Lightning, Cold. Then we are running a thing called Sublime Vision. Sublime Vision makes it so that 30%, or up to 30, you have to roll 30, fire and lightning damage that you take is taken on your cold damage, which means that you now only take 20% of fire and lightning damage as fire and lightning. The rest is 50 to chaos and 30 to cold. But we can fix the rest of this through Watcher's Eye, since we're running a Purity of Ice in the high budget version. And that makes it so that the remaining 20% of fire and lightning damage is taken as cold. This means that you never, ever, ever take any sources of fire damage or lightning damage. If you take that, 50% of that damage is mitigated by your cold rest, and 50% is mitigated by your chaos rest. And if you take a cold hit, 50% of that is mitigated by your chaos rest, and the rest on cold. So that's how this build is handling that type of defenses. I just absolutely love playing this. Sublime Vision prevents you from having any other aura except for Purity of Ice. But what it doesn't prevent you is from having buffs, such as Tempest Shield, as an example. It doesn't prevent you from having additional specters that provides auras. It just makes you not able to activate auras. So in our case, we're actually running an Arctic Armor for freeze immunity, Tempest Shield for shock immunity, Purity of Ice, which is the only aura you can run, and then we have 2 different specters. We'll run 7 Wretch Defilers, then we'll run 1 Perfect Spirit of Fortune, which makes all of our lightning damage from nearby allies be lucky, which is super important for lightning damage builds. And the last Spectre is a Guardian Turtle. Those 2 last Spectres goes in a separate link and not with your damage links, because they are the ones providing Feeding Frenzy to buff the rest of your army. So that's how the high budget build is functioning and set up. this is one of the builds I thought was very, very fun and had the most fun playing. I wanted to make this because back in 3.25, everyone was running Svalin. Svalin looks like this. If I could learn how to spell, stay in school, kids. This is Svalin. And it is just one of the most crazy shields out there. Extremely tanky, but in our case, I want to use Bitterbind Point, but I wanted to make a build that handled without Svalin. On the top right corner, I made two different versions of Svalin. One is using Spork gloves, and for those of you out there who don't know what that is, basically it is ridiculously influenced gloves with where you socket your gems in instead of your body armor. This is another way to do it. It can pack a bit more damage if you approach it this way, but it does make the rest of the gear a little tighter to manage. But there's another non-Svalin version with no Spork gloves where you put your actual gems in the Doriani instead. So these are the two versions we have for the high budget, but I wanted to show you that but not talk too much about it. But I just saw that the time of this recording is getting pretty long, so I don't want to waste your time too much. I'm very excited for this build. Do check out the build guide down below. If you have any questions, let me know. And yeah, hit the like button, subscribe for more content. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Good lord, this video was way longer than I intended it to be. I'm excited for Spectres. I love this. What can I say? But I'll catch you guys in the next one. Till then, stay safe and keep rocking.